Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So we've got the U.S. START II treaty signed by Obama and Medvedev, and the inevitable optimism, I guess, around this. I'm thinking of the spirit of Locarno, 1925, right, that was going to bring essentially peace in our time. Didn't work. Especially arms control treaties are a very, very unstable basis for anything. Obama has now announced his new nuclear strategy. The U.S. will not use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear states who attack with chemical and biological weapons unless those non-nuclear states are branded by the U.S. as not observing the Non-Proliferation Treaty or otherwise are exempted. So basically a meaningless statement. Again, this is all window dressing. This is to try to get some cover for a policy of attempting to strangle the economic development of Iran and prepare the breakup of Iran under the cover of nuclear non-proliferation and the fight against nuclear terrorism. I would, in addition to all the obvious points that have been made about this by all kinds of people, the idea that the U.S. is talking about the non-proliferation regime, the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, is an obscene joke, because the U.S.-India nuclear deal is already a complete violation that throws this entire non-proliferation regime out the window. So the biggest violator is now going to be judging who is in conformity with the NPT and who is not. And they say Iran is not in conformity with the NPT. Well, that's not what the International Atomic Energy Agency says, even under the ambiguous character Amano, certainly not under El Baradei. Do we have any statement in that direction? So then we're going to have this Photo Opportunity Summit, which again, 47 countries. Medvedev, I guess, is going to be here. President Hu of China will come. Netanyahu will not come because he thinks that the Muslim countries will gang up on him as a nuclear weapons state. The idea, again, same thing. Get some credibility so that you can beat Iran over the head on nuclear issues. And, of course, for Hu, it costs him nothing to come. I'm just wondering, if you look at what Chinese Prime Minister Wen did at Copenhagen with this masterful blocking of the Anglo-American attempt at installing a worldwide carbon dictatorship to strangle the development of India, China, and the rest of the third world, look at what Wen did in Copenhagen. Is that what Hu might do in Washington, D.C.? In other words, prevent the formation of a lockstep under U.S.-British domination with French help from Sarkozy against Iran. That'll be interesting to see because he's not just going to be a potted plant. He's going to be an active participant. We've also got the U.S. now getting China to discuss sanctions against Iran. The Chinese had not been willing to discuss it, and they're still not even willing, as far as I can see. Foreign Ministry in Beijing is not willing to confirm that China is discussing sanctions against Iran. This had started when Sarkozy came to town, this wounded demagogue. After losing his regional elections, he started posturing with Obama about how bad Iran was, trying to give himself some profile in that regard. And now China is talking. Well, they may talk for a long time. They may have joined these talks to sabotage them, to delay them, to dilute, to delay, and all the other obvious things. So they'll take the long view there, too. A lot of hysteria in the Anglo-American press this past week about China supports Iran sanctions. Has not happened. China agrees to float renminbi. Also has not happened. We've also got, when Geithner was in India, he celebrated that U.S.-Indian alliance. And that, again, clear violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty regime. We're having in Iraq, the U.S., with power of the U.S. collapsing everywhere across the world, the U.S. puppet Alawi is not able so far to form a government against Maliki, who comes on the scene as a Iranian-backed and indeed Chinese-backed candidate. And we've now got Muqtada Sadr of the Mahdi army, the Shiites of the lower Euphrates, coming on in support of Jafari, the other guy who has been prime minister so far. We've got all three of them. All three of the prime ministers post-Saddam are now contending for the prime minister's office. And I think it's a sign that, again, U.S. position not very strong. More reality, as usual, comes from the man with a mind like a rag bag who periodically blurts out things that he's heard in his briefings, which he's not supposed to say in public. Biden now says nuclear war has never been more likely than today because of nuclear terrorism. And that is what Obama is actually going to be up to on the 12th and 13th next week with the Nuclear Weapons Security Summit here in Washington, D.C. So, concerning the Middle East, I've said this a number of times here, but you can now see it in the Washington Post. Column by David Ignatius this past Wednesday, April 7th, Obama's Middle East plan, and it's what I've said. It is to assemble an Arab-Sunni front against Iran. And the critical thing is that the solution of the Israeli-Palestinian contention, the two-state solution so-called, is intimately linked to the attempt to contain, reduce, break up Iran. These are basically the same policy. It's not to say to Israel, you've just got to make a deal with the Palestinians. It's to say, you can make a deal with the Palestinians because you should really be worrying about Iran. So make a deal with the Palestinians, even with the PLO and with Hamas, because then we're going to proceed to use that as a springboard to get the Arabs and the Sunnis lined up against Iran, even as we go for sanctions, and that will take away your biggest problem perceived by people like Netanyahu. So the Obama policy is a war policy, and we're told by Ignatius that Netanyahu, under the cover of all of this brouhaha, right, the big diplomatic clashes and the dinner invitation that he didn't get, that Netanyahu is seriously considering an American peace plan to resolve the Palestinian conflict because it's linked to some idea of taking out Iran, but using these Arab and Sunni proxies as the way to do that. In other words, don't you Israelis fight Iran. Let's use the Arabs and the Sunnis in the first line, and let's use them up. Let's get them chopped to pieces against the Iranians. So that is a policy likely to lead to war. And if you look across the world, Thailand is also in a state of emergency. We'll look at the internal Thai situation. It's always got to do in Thailand between pro-Chinese forces and U.S. forces that are mainly anti-Chinese, anti-trade, and so forth in their general orientation. So now we're going to switch gears now. We've got to take a couple of steps backward, and we've gone through this big austerity push coming from Volcker, from Bernanke, from Orsag, ultimately from Obama, right, because he's going to become the austerity man next year. If you have a situation where Obama starts turning around and saying, I'm now going to cut the main form of social insurance, Social Security, here in the United States, you are back once again to 80 years ago. The Hermann Müller government of the SPD, Social Democrats in Germany, who fell 80 years ago on an issue of cutting social insurance in the form of unemployment benefits. And we'd just like to get back to the Weimar comparison in a minute on World Crisis Radio.